Crescent. Fertile Crescent started in Egypt, went all the way around. It's in green over the yellow on the right. And it was really the first place for trade that we know of, even before ancient China, which is pretty old. We are finding more and more that it wasn't just parts of the Fertile Crescent, but they were trading all the way across it. And that's a long journey before the horse. Camels were domesticated about 2200 BC. Before that, they had to walk. But they did invent the wheel in Mesopotamia on the right side, what is now Persia and Iraq. And they did invent the boat. Basically, they had canals and they had boats. And then they invented the sailboat. And that's way back in the first city-states, roughly 3000 BC. So they traded, and we'll talk about that. Then we'll talk about ancient South Arabia, which is more the incense route. So now we're talking north-south predominantly. We went up north and hit the east-west part. Then we'll talk about the very first real coins, where it's Lydia. You can't have a talk on ancient trade routes without talking about Lydia or Lydia, however you want to pronounce it. Asia Minor is the old term for Turkey. Basically, think about Turkey. We'll talk about ancient Persia, who dominated the landscape for quite a while, including Egypt. And then we'll talk about ancient Greece and Macedon with all the city-states like Athens, Corinth, and then Alexander the Great, his father. They unified Greece, which was bunch of city-states, so that they could tackle Persia and kind of get back at Persia for defeating them centuries before. We'll talk about Egypt. We're talking about Greek Egypt, Ptolemaic. Ptolemy was a general of Alexander the Great, very Greek, and Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, and Ptolemy was his general who he put in charge as a satrap or a governor, and when Alexander died, Ptolemy became the king and the pharaoh of Egypt. And we'll talk about Thrace and Seleucia, the other two offshoots of Alexander's kingdoms. Because when Alexander died, his generals fought it out. And 4 were victorious. One was Ptolemy in Egypt, the other was Lysimachus in Thrace, and I have coins of all these guys. And then there's Seleucus I in Seleucia, which was the great majority of that empire that Alexander built. And then there was Cassander, who took over Macedonia itself and murdered Alexander's wife and son so that he couldn't take the throne. And that's that in a nutshell. Next slide. We're going to save this for next time. Okay, next slide. Sorry, Josh. One more. I can probably do that. Oh, hang on. I don't know what I just did. Next slide.
Here it is.
Thank you. So this is some of what I researched for this greater presentation, both the Greek and then later the second part. And then there's some other books over here that aren't mentioned up there, and feel free to browse a lot of the atlases, the Bible Atlas. I did want to bring out a few that I really like. This book, Coins of the Bible, actually has replica coins, some of which I'll talk about. And it's just really a good little book by Friedberg. It's not a new book. Friedberg is one of the authorities on biblical coinage. So I'll pass that around. There you go. And then this one, Money of the Bible, because the Bible mentions all these trade routes. There's other sources, but the Bible really covers a lot of this territory along with other sources. And this has a lot of the pictures of the coins I'll be talking about tonight too, so I can maybe start back here and pass that one around. But these are two I've had in my book collection for a long time. Yeah. Okay. Next. Thank you. So the Fertile Crescent. I'll go on over here. So Mesopotamia really means the land between the rivers. And what are those rivers? You have the Nile in Egypt, but then you have the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now Iraq. And Mesopotamia was the land between those rivers and a couple others in antiquity that started up in Turkey or Asia Minor and came down. The first cities that we know of, the very first cities, city-states, are from Mesopotamia. Uruk, and they didn't have money, but they traded quite extensively. They even traded with India, ancient India. They traded all the way to the Holy Land, what we would call the Levant or Canaan, and Egypt. So how did they do it without money? Well, they kept track. They had to keep track of their trade. So they had 5 tokens representing different categories of trade items. 5 major tokens like barley, animals, and so there they are: grain, human labor, livestock, but they're and other things. They're finding more than just 5. So then these clay tokens actually fit inside an envelope or piggy bank, a clay token piggy bank. And they would take that on the road. And when they came back, they would then inscribe all the who owed us, we owe them, onto cuneiform tablets. And cuneiform tablets are quite scarce, but they had millions of them. They're scarce because they don't survive time. Here's a real cuneiform tablet. I'll pass around. Please don't drop it. It will break, and it is valuable. So you can just go around that way. So they would inscribe everything on cuneiform tablets. Cuneiform was the type of writing they used. We'll talk a little bit about that. So the world's first money found in Susa were these clay tokens. They've been dated to about 3,300 BC. Then later, silver was useful, still is. So they didn't have silver coins. They had hack silver in the Germanic language, but hack silver, and they were often had lines in them so you could break them off. And there's some pictures of that where you can kind of break off the hack silver, horizontal, vertical grooves. So now we're talking about this being described in the book, in the Bible, in 1 Samuel. They're describing this kind of hack silver used for smaller purchases. And we're talking 1049 BC, so still a long time before the first coins, which don't come until a little later, we'll talk about. So what about these weights? Everything was by weight. Gold, obviously, was very valuable as a weighted metal. And then silver, and then bronze. They also used lead, and lead was used in a lot of different things. So, but they did trade lead, but lead's very heavy, so trading it over long distances, not so much. Same with bronze. Talent, manna, and shekel. These are weights adopted from the Sumerians, and Sumerians had a sexagesimal system based on 60. And in cuneiform, 1 slash would be the base 60. So you could denote by a single wedge or upright line. And it's still going on today, right? 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, etc., etc. So we're going way back, 2,300 BC. Silver in other forms. This is a very rare ingot. I wish I had it, but there's only basically one of them known, 1 or 2. And it was an Egyptian pharaoh, Tutankhamun, from 1345 1327 BC. So that was stamped, and that was possibly the first coin in a way, because it was a stamped ingot. All right, next slide. Again, Fertile Crescent, kingdoms and currencies, they call this. So Egyptian workers who built the pyramids, as well as the workers who built the cities in Mesopotamia, like Uruk and Ur, were paid. They had to pay their workers. So they paid them with bread and beer. joke in the military that war doesn't run on soldiers and airplanes. It runs on beans, bullets, and beer. That's the old joke, you know. But back then, beer wasn't necessarily alcoholic. It could be, but it was a bowl of mead that was very nutritious. It was almost pure carbohydrate with a little bit of protein. And if you were a worker, you were paid, at least in part, depending on how skilled you were, with a bowl of mead. And maybe even if you're working, there's probably a non-alcoholic version of beer, a malt beverage. But they might have had a little alcohol in it because those guys are all beat up. So Abraham, a little later, he paid 4,000 shekels, which was about 11.5 grams of shekel then, for a cave for his family burial. Well, where did the shekel come from? Remember that bowl of mead? There was a name for it. That was a unit of measure. That name eventually became shekel. So names of coins started with units of measure. And for years, if it didn't weigh right, it was really fraudulent, and you could be hung for improper weights. Elsewhere in the Bible it says, be careful, don't have two standards of weights. So having a system of measurement was very, very important. In the Code of Hammurabi, 1800 BC in ancient Babylon, they valued labor at 10 shekels. That would be probably silver. Exodus 21:32 sets the value of a male slave at 30 shekels. They had both slaves and indentured servants. And they had a system of freeing the slaves and servants every so often, and they would free them and that's also in the Bible, freeing your slaves after so many years of good work and treating them well. But that's another use of a shekel of silver, in that case most likely. Finally, down in what is now Yemen, Ethiopia, the Sabaeans, you think Queen of Sheba, Shabaini is another way to pronounce that, in an area called the Hadramut, they started trading spices, gold, and silver, very valuable spices that didn't weigh too much. So frankincense, for example, was worth its weight in gold. It was that valuable. It was used in all kinds of things, from embalming to funeral ceremonies, ancient Greece and Rome. So they got very rich just off having aromatic spices and some gold. So later on, we'll talk, the Romans noted this wealth in this incense route, this southern part of the Fertile Crescent, and they called it Happy Arabia, Arabia Felix, because they were doing pretty well. And actually, the weather wasn't all that bad back then. They had a lot of green in part of the year. It was monsoonal. So in this trading in aromatic spices, frankincense, myrrh, and several others became very big. Well, eventually they would trade frankincense for silver. Silver from something like Athens, the city-state of Athens. We have an owl on one side and Athena on the other. Athena's symbol of wisdom, so is the owl. So as we start talking the Fertile Crescent, you also can look a little later in the book of Daniel. It talks about the ram against the goat when Alexander's armies fought the Persian armies. Well, the Persians were a ram. And one of my oldest things from about 2500 BC in Babylon is a bronze ram. And it was probably used in both, it's probably used in trade too. So that's one of my oldest metal things, if you would. And then they used ring money. And I have some ring money up here. So I'll pass around some ring money as well. This is from about 1000 BC in the ancient Levant on the west side of the Fertile Crescent. So we go from east-west to north-south now with the incense wrap. We have the ship of the desert. We have Frank. I took most of these pictures. That's me with a Omani cop, and we traded hats. I think he's got my ball cap, and I have his Omani. It's so much fun. These guys are great. Well, that place is where all the frankincense sets sail. It's called Sumhamran, or Horuri. Hor means a bay or cove. And that was where they had a city, and even the Queen of Sheba's inscribed, where the frankincense, which is worth its weight in gold, set sail for the Egyptians, the Pharaohs, the Greco-Roman Empire, and even over in Iraq, the Akkadian Empire. So we have all this trade going on, and we haven't even gotten to money yet. The kind of money we think of. But to them, it was cash, good as cash, right? Next slide. By the way, this is Jerusalem, the tomb of Absalom. Trade kingdom, south to north. So really quick, we're going to talk about the coins that came from Saba or Sheba were patterned after the Athenian tetradrachms, and later after Alexander's tetradrachms. A tetradrachm is 16 grams of silver, roughly. And these are kind of rare coins. I've got one. I was able to find one somewhere. It's very rough, but if you look at it, you have the king on the front instead of Athena. It's a Sabaean king or Katabani king. On the back, you have a very crude owl. So I'll pass that around. I only got one of those. I couldn't find another one that big, so I will put all these back in their place when they come back. Eventually, they got to these coins down here, and they looked a lot like that Athenian owl tetradrachm, but they were rougher, and they looked more like this. Had a very prominent Arab nose on them. Had the owl. There's a test cut on it. I'll pass that around. 16 grams of silver, a little more, 16.4 grams of silver. And that's what they were trading on. So now we're finally into the era of coinage. Okay, thanks. And as far as the frankincense root goes, did you bring this one? Yeah. All right, another one to go around, and it goes back to him. This is an Athenian tetradrachm. So this is from Athens. And these are patterned, the ones I are patterned after this. So we'll pass that Athenian tetradrachm around. All right, Kataban was another kingdom like in the desert along the frankincense route. They helped control it. Several cities. It could actually be really nice down there. I've actually been in that area. And then in the winter, it gets really hot. Monsoonal, just the opposite of what we have here. All right, and Himyarites were another kingdom that helped control the trade of spices and a lot of other things. And their coins are usually smaller. And I got some Himyaritic coins up here somewhere. Saw one not too long ago. Here's one. We'll pass that guy around. And you can see the king's head on the front. He's got braids, kind of like, looks like Bob Marley a little bit. They're little silver coins. Remember, trade across these distances, silver, gold, or something very precious, like frankincense. Okay, and then finally, little known kingdom in North Africa. They say it's the first Christian kingdom of Africa was the Axumites. They made some beautiful gold coins. You can see here you've got a cross at the top, but then they became, well, Islam took over by force, and then they had a crescent and a star later. So they changed hands as far as religions until they went pagan. The universe, all these different planets. Mars was a god, right? Because it's red, it's cool. That rock, that's really cool, that's a god. That tree that, there's no trees around here, that's a god. They went from that to Christianity and then Islam. And I don't know where they're at now. There's a coin of, passing around. Hemorrhagic, and that's accidental. Next slide. Okay, yeah, this is a big one. Lydia, I'm going to pronounce it Lydia. Who knows how to pronounce it better? They were the first country place to actually stamp a real coin. It was made of a product called electrum. Electrum's a naturally occurring bimetallic ore or mineral of gold and silver. 50-50, 60-40, depend, but they first just started getting nuggets of electrum, shaping them, hitting a line on it. The first king of Lydia, the guy's name, what was his name? Gyges. Yeah, so the first coin, King Alyattes. But he's not the famous one. The famous one is Croesus. Croesus came and the saying was richest Croesus. And why did Croesus really make a difference? He separated the gold from the silver. So now you had gold Lydian coins and silver Lydian coins. And their trade network was quite extensive. They traded, they even think they traded with China, Silk Road, possibly. So trade routes go way back. When is this? These coins about 600, 620, 630 BC. Right, so these are older than the other ones we passed around from the incense route. So we're kind of going back and forth chronologically.
That looks like the West Africa, the modern day Turkey, is that what it is?
Yeah, up there.
At the map.
Well, that's Turkey, yeah. Lydia was Asian Minor
Yeah.
on the coast, you're right. So, Sardis was their capital. It was a bustling center for commerce. They had beautiful buildings. There's a modern thing that has beautiful gates, the lion gates. Now it's ruins, of course. But they had a thriving trade empire. They were taken over by who? Who took over the Lydians? Who conquered them? Next slide. Okay, Persians. Persians came along and they just started. They had big armies. The first Persian king of note is Darius the First. He took these Lydian gold statters, gold coins, called statters. It's a weight, unit of measure. And he used those for a while, but he stamped like a hero king with a bow on it. And his name's Darius, so he called them Darics. So the gold coins were Darics under Darius the First, and the silver coins were siglos, also a unit of measure, weight. It comes from weight. Everything's by weight, remember? So now we have Darics, sigloses, and a few other coins, these Parthian drachms a little later. So now we're about 250 BC. And then the Scythians, who may have been related to the wise men who brought frankincense, myrrh, and gold to the baby Jesus. They were great horsemen, camelmen, great traders, right time frame, Azes. Those coins are pretty obtainable. Silver tetradrachms for 100, 150 bucks for a lot of silver, and drachms for much cheaper. They were big trades. So Scythia, Indo-Scythian was their language. There was what is now Afghanistan, Bactria area. Okay, and then finally you get to Persia, elephant bronzes, much later than we're talking about, but it's a continuum of trade, a continuum of kingdoms changing hands, territory gains and losts, but trade was the common denominator, and trade was also something that kept the peace. If you were trading, you didn't really want to fight the people that were buying your stuff, and you were getting their stuff. We get to the Nabateans, just about 100 BC, 150 BC. They built Petra, they built other cities. I've been to several of them, it's beautiful. Greg's been over there. They had the king and the queen on the front, and a double cornucopia on the back. They built this beautiful rose red city here, Petra. The camel carried all the frankincense, myrrh, gold, all the trade routes. They controlled the trade routes. Why? They knew where the water was. So you talk about gold and silver, no comparison to water. Water's the blue gold. So if you knew where the water was, you controlled the trade. You could water your camels, and so the Nabateans really controlled the trade. This is a rare Nabatean silver dinar of Rabel and his wife, King and the Queen, and then him on the back. And I have a couple of these up here you can look at. Most of the Nabatean coins people are familiar with are the bronze ones. But again, they didn't trade long distance with bronze. They traded long distance with silver and gold. Next slide. Persia. All right, we got to talk a little bit more about Persia because look what they did. They took over the entire, almost the entire known world, even Egypt. And they had huge armies, very well trained. Nobody could defeat them. They had the standard weight. We talked a little bit about that. They used gold, silver, electrum. And their trade networks, they called the Royal Road. At least somebody did. There's a book called the Royal Road. So the Persian Royal Road is before the Greeks, before the Romans. And they laid the foundation for roads that later the Greeks and Romans would follow. Build their roads on top of old roads. A huge trade network. The one thing the Persians were not very good at, they were really not good at assimilating people. They were more like, do it our way or the highway. So they built a lot of resistance, especially in Egypt. They didn't let the people do what they had always done necessarily. They diverted the taxes to what they wanted to do. They did some good things with waterworks, like canals and stuff. But for the most part, compared to the Greeks, the Persians were in Persia itself, they built beautiful cities like Persepolis. They did stimulate economic growth and commerce within their empire through their coinage. Here's that hero king. It's a very rough siglos, a little better one. So if this was gold and that was gold, that gold is $10,000 for the really nice one, and about $2,000 for the not so nice one. Ain't cheap. All right.
What's the reverse on those? What is that?
Nothing on the back. It's an incuse punch. Every once in a while you think you can see something in the punch, and maybe you can, like a crayfish or something, but for the most part it was just a punch on the back. Okay, they did make other coins. A little later, Sasania, this is after the time frame we're really talking about, but 100 BC, Perseus put his face on it. Typical Persian head, same as for their magi, which other wise men put probabilities, they look like that. And we have some of those coins up here. Next slide. Okay, ancient Greece. Talk of the ancient world and trade routes would be totally incomplete with talking about ancient Greece. The problem with talking about ancient Greece, it's so extensive. There's so many city-states have minted coins, so many trade networks, a lot of them maritime. And so because a lot of them were maritime routes, not land routes, they had both. A lot of their symbology, if I can find it, involved octopuses and they had other hippocamps. A hippocamp was a swimming horse, mythological creature, maybe. Maybe there was one, I don't know. But typical port, Greek city-state, we're talking Corinth, Athens, many others. They had a genus silver turtle coins at the very top, a little turtle. They can get quite expensive now for a really good one. You can get one that you go, is that a turtle? For about $300, $400. I got one. I can kind of tell it's a turtle. But they were used in maritime trade. They were used to pay the merchant mariners. A lot of these guys selling the ships weren't theirs. They were kind kind of tough sailors, you definitely wanted to pay your tough sailors, because otherwise they may have some retribution. They all had their own symbology. They also used a barter system. They had boats, they had more room, they didn't have to have coins all the time, so they could use more of a barter system and coins. Again, the Athenian silver owl in that time frame, 500, 400, 300 BC, was the dominant trade coin until our next slide we'll talk about Macedon, Philip, and Alexander. But for now, this is pretty much the coinage. The Akkadian League, you had the Thessalian League, you had all these Greek city-states that didn't really like each other too much. Sparta would fight Athens, and it wasn't until the next slide when Alexander the Great, son of Philip II, comes around. This is really northern Greece. So you start up there in the upper left, and the capital city was Pella. And Alexander was the cavalry leader for his father, Philip II. Philip II was a heck of a soldier. He was always on the road, so he had to first defeat and then unite the Greeks before they could go after the Persians. And by the way, all this is mentioned very clearly and prophetically in the book of Daniel. You see the rise of Persia, you see the rise of Macedon, the ram and the goat, you see the clash, you see the horn that represents Alexander in a vision that is given to Daniel, and then you see that horn broken. Alexander dies, his wife and kids are killed by one of his 4 generals, and you see 4 more horns sprout out in the book of Daniel. Those are his 4 main generals that beat the other. They were started out with like 8, so it came down to 4. And you have Alexander the Great's huge kingdom that he built by first defeating Persia. So it was really Greek silver against Persian derricks and sigloses as far as a monetary fight. But the winner takes all. So when Alexander defeated them in battle several battles, he at first was using the coins. Remember, it's by weight. Alexander didn't care whose picture was on it. He didn't care some hero king. So until much later, that coinage did not reflect Macedon's victory over Persia, but they did make their own coins. And their own coins were tetradrachms and drachms of silver, as well as gold statters. And I got a gold statter here. I'll pass around because it's not real. I can't afford a real one. Somewhere in here. Here you go. Such a cool coin. The real ones are like $8,000. Tell you what, I'll just pass the whole box around. These have quite a few of the silver coins used in trade, and they're kind of stuck in there. And this gold one right here is an Alexandrian statter replica. It has real gold in it. And that's this one. Who's that in the back? Looks like an angel. It's Nike, who is angelic. The Greek word for angel, angelos, means messenger. And they believe they're messengers from their god, the prime god, the one god, Zeus. And that messenger went out and gave messages, sometimes in battle. All right, so the Achaemenid is Persian Empire. So Alexander is a great horseman, as well as a leader, as well as a diplomat and a strategist. He could see the battle like almost from an eagle's eyes. And his soldiers were loyal to the core when he was alive. So he won almost every battle he ever fought. He retreated very few times. The generals, the Diadochi in Greek, those are those 4 guys that eventually rose and Some of their coins look a lot like his coins because they liked Alexander so much, they kept his picture on it, which is actually Hercules, because Alexander was deified as Hercules. And so, let's see, let's try to find one of these, pass it around. I'll just pass this tray around. This coin, Lysimachus, one of my favorite generals of Alexander, he fought a lion with a knife because Alexander challenged him to do that. He was a tough guy. And he got what is now Thrace. And you might remember that because I'll give a talk on Thrace. Thrace is fascinating coinage. And it even predates Lysimachus. Thrace. These guys were metallurgists to the nth degree. So I'll just pass around this tray, and that Lysimachus coin would be 1/4 of the Alexandrian Empire after defeating the Persians. And after Alexander dies, where does he die? Anybody know?
Babylon.
Where?
Egypt.
Good guess. Babylon. He made Babylon one of his second capital cities outside of Macedonia. And he died of typhoid and maybe a little too much celebrating after winning a battle. 11 years he conquered the known world. That all got divided up into 4 empires. Seleucia to the north, all the way to Afghanistan, Ptolemaic Egypt, Thrace, which is more the Black Sea area, and Macedonia itself, the original kingdom under Cassander. Under Cassander, who killed his wife and son. Nice guys. Lots of military power, rich coinage, and diplomacy. So Alexander would conquer Afghanistan, which was Bactria, and he would marry a princess, and that his son Alexander IV was from the gal Roxana he married, because that's how they kept it going. You had to treat your subjects well. You had to build them up. Let them keep running what they could run well. Next slide. All right, so trade currencies, Fertile Crescent. This is kind of a big summation with a few coins. The owl being very, very popular. And some of the most beautiful art on coins. This Thessalian League of Greece, and the horse in the back. Helios, the sun god. You have Gorgon with head of snake like Medusa. They've often put him on the shield to strike fear into the enemy, but they put him on coins too, give an incuse punch on the back. You have, I believe that would be Athena in a Corinthian war helmet and a bull on the back. Here you have a Lydian statue. You got the lion, the very first coin. A lion and then the punch on the back. Here you have the Persian Derek with the hero king in a crouch. He often has a bow and he has a dagger down here. Same on the silver one. There's your Alexandrian tetradrachm, 16.4 grams of silver. He's wearing a lion. See the lion's head? There's the lion's tooth going up near his ear. That's how he went to battle. At least when he was fighting for Greece, when he's fighting as king of Egypt, Pharaoh, he wore an elephant skin headdress and with a ram's horn, because Ammon, symbol for Ammon, was a ram in Egypt as well as Persia. All right, kind of confusing. There you have the Lion of Babylon. This is one of Alexander's coins from Babylon. It says in Greek, Alexandroi. You got the star, which is promise, symbol of promise. Royalty, lion, royalty. Yeah, cool coins, all trade coins, because silver and gold trade. The huge empire we're talking. We haven't gotten past what is now Persia, Afghanistan, which is Bactria, into China, the Silk Road. We haven't talked about Rome. We'll do that next. Next slide. Okay. Try to get through that pretty quick. Hope I did. Questions?
Do you want me to get this coin out? Because I can get it out.
Can you? Yeah, get it out. That'd be great. Good job. You got smaller fingers than me. Thank you, pass that around, very good, appreciate you. Up here I have, okay, so you have east-west Silk Roads, and yeah, the Silk Road was in existence back in Greek times, but it wasn't extensive like it became in Roman and later times. So I don't have too many of the Silk Road coins. I have a few that are old, like 300, 400 BC ones. This would be the South Arabia, more the instant trade coins we talked about. And all these coins are in holders up here. And I guess some are still coming around. Gotta get that one owl coin back, for sure. And you guys are welcome to ask any questions or make any comments.
So how long did it take to make this collection?
This presentation?
No, the collection.
Oh,
Coins.
yeah, I've been collecting coins for a while. I don't know, Josh, how long have you been collecting coins?
Oh, at least 15 years.
At least 20 years.
Twenty years.
They took you to the bank.
More than that, let's see, I was in gee, I'd love